So today I'm going to be talking about the apartheid. So yeah, let's get started. Well, who really started the apartheid? I mean, in South Africa, there had been a lot of racial segregation and white supremacy, despite white South Africans being in the minority. The majority of people living in South Africa, at, especially at the beginning of the 20th century, were non-white people. So in 1913, the Land Act was passed. And it was just about 3 years after South Africa gained its independence. And well, what this did was marking a start, an official beginning for this period of territorial segregation. It forced Black Africans to live in reserves, and it was illegal for them to work as sharecroppers. So, I mean, yeah, it was purely like territorial segregation, and they were economically limited as well. So, opponents of this Land Act, they formed the South African National Native Congress, which then would become the African National Congress. Then, in the 1930s and then 1940s, the Great Depression and the Second World War happened, which, as you can probably expect, did not make things better. In fact, it made things worse. It just made things worse for them economically and socially. Racism was increased. Well, the Afrikaner National Party won the election in 1948, and they won the election through this slogan, the slogan being apartheid, which means apartness. And that's where like the whole apartheid thing comes from this national party. Well, their policy was to separate white South Africans from non-white South Africans and non-white South Africans from each other to decrease like their political power, and as well as Black South Africans dividing them along tribal lines. And it's just pure segregation. It's a different name. The apartheid is a different name for segregation. Essentially, it's literally the same thing that was happening in America at the time, just in South Africa. And I mean, the Afrikaner National Party, they did want initially equal development and freedom of cultural laws, but in reality, this was impractical. And I mean, when I was researching this, when I was reading an article on this, the words that came to mind were separate but equal. That's literally segregation, the Jim Crow laws in America. So, like this, literally segregation, but in South Africa. Well, by 1950, the year 1950, so 2 years after the Afrikaner National Party won the elections, marriages between white and non-white South Africans were banned. They were just straight up banned. You couldn't get married. You couldn't have interracial marriages. And well, I mean, marriage was one thing, but also there were no sexual relations allowed between Black and white South Africans. Then there was a series of acts which only made things worse. I'm just going to name a couple. So, first of all, the Population Registration Act, which really established the framework for the apartheid, and it classified South Africans by race. So there were 3 categories, and then a 4th one being added later on. First one being Bantu. If you were a Black South African, you were Bantu. Then the next one was colored, and that was mixed. So you had white South African families and Black South African family, you would be colored. And then the 3rd category was white, and that is just white South African. Then later on, this category of Asian would be added, and that included Indian and Pakistani people. That's just 2 countries out of the whole continent, but whatever. This legislation actually split families. Parents could be classed as white, whilst their children could be classed as colored. And I mean, I've read an awful lot on Nazi Germany, so when I was reading this, it's literally the same thing as the law for the protection of German blood and German honor. Literally the same thing, only that classified Jews and this classified people based on the color of their skin and their race. It's literally the same thing. Like, people don't see it as the same, but it is. Well, then, and remember the Land Act of 1913? Well, 1950, even more land acts were passed, setting aside over 80% of the country's land for whites, meaning black and non-white South African people just having 20% of the land in South Africa, further limiting them economically and therefore socially. It's just like one thing happened. It's like it's a domino effect, I guess. I don't know. I don't remember the exact term, which is one thing leads to another, which leads to another. Well, the past laws also were passed. Well, they were not laws per se, but these required non-whites to carry the documents with them at all times in case they entered restricted areas and they had to show them. If this applied to every citizen, fine, but this was only for non-whites. Because if they passed through restricted areas, they needed to show the documentation, and also they were stopped far more than whites. Also, in order to prevent any conflicts and tensions, they started putting up separate facilities for whites and non-whites. This is literally segregation. Like the apartheid is literally segregation, and I mean, personally, maybe people do, but personally, I've never heard it being like, the apartheid is the same thing as segregation. I've never heard it before, and it is. Also, non-whites couldn't participate in national government. And I'm going to mention another act, the Group Areas Act, started actual physical separation, with some groups moving to separate areas depending on their racial background. And oh my god, this is to treat the ghettos in Nazi Germany. Same thing. And people are like, oh my god, the Nazis, yeah, they ended in 1945, and nothing so bad has happened ever since. But that's not true. That is literally 5 years after the Nazi regime collapsed. And there were ghettos, kind of, not ghettos per se, but ghettos. There were separate facilities. There were laws establishing how a citizen should be classified based on the color of their skin and on their families. Same thing, literally the same thing. And in America, well, the Jim Crow laws were in the 1920s, but in the 1950s was also law segregation. The Civil Rights Movement was in the 1960s. And on the apartheid issue, there's more laws. And there's like a bigger one, but I'll probably save that one for another video, because the main part of the apartheid is the whole opposition. And Nelson Mandela, he was one of the main opponents of the apartheid. And that merits its own video because it's very interesting. So yeah, that is all I'm going to say. I'm not going to add anything else because that's the apartheid, and that's the establishment of it and the basis of the apartheid itself. Then there's like the most important part of the apartheid is the most notable part, not important, the most notable part is the opposition and the things Nelson Mandela got to do. Nelson Mandela is the main guy when you talk about the apartheid. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say. I hope you liked it, and yeah, thank you for watching. Bye.